Hello and welcome back to the StudyTube project. I'm Laura and I'm a digital media student. Today's video is all about visual composition, which is a really important topic in terms of photography, film, design, anything, to be honest. It's a really important part of media. I'm going to just run over the basics with you so you can understand how important correct and incorrect framing can be. We're going to begin with dimension. This is particularly relevant in filmmaking. Effective dimension allows us to have a sense of scale within the content. For example, we have the X, Y, and Z axis, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. The X-axis is the horizontal line of the image. This can also be referred to as the horizon line. This specific axis is very important as it either allows us to see the frame in a realistic way that has visual harmony, or it can be manipulated in shots that use Dutch angles, which are like this on screen. These angles are usually used in horror films or dramas, or when the director just wants to create a sense of disorientation and alter the preferred reading of the audience. The Y-axis is the vertical line of the image. Again, this can be used effectively by directors to change the perspective of the audience. The Z-axis can be formed in many ways, from train tracks to corridors to streets. This axis allows us to comprehend the image and understand how the dimensions align with one another. This brings me on to relative size. The use of the Z-axis allows us to establish and estimate the distance of an object by comparing the said object relative to other objects in the image. For example, if you're walking down a corridor, there is a clear leading line in front of you. If someone else is at the end of this same corridor, they immediately look a lot smaller to you due to the depth and the distance. But if you were to zoom out of that image and measure that person in relation to the corridor size, you see that they were actually a similar height to you. The difference in size of the image you see may enable you to judge the distance of something from your standing position. The Z-axis also creates a distinction between a flat and a deep image. As you can see on the left, there is a clear Z-axis, which means this is a deep frame, as we're able to distinguish depth and relative size within this image. On the right, you can see a flat frame. There is no clear Z-axis here, meaning we miss the depth of this image. Both flat and deep frames can be used effectively within filmmaking or photography to establish a scene or carry a storyline forward. Scale and hierarchy. Hierarchy is the arrangement and design of elements placed in order to visually signal importance. For example, I am in this frame right now, and if I wanted to add something that said subscribe, I would put it at the bottom of the frame. This keeps the focus of the frame on the subject, which is me. However, if I decided to add this title in the center, see how your perspective or your focus changes. Now that this title is as large as my face, your focus changes and this undermines the subject of the image. This is because in every visual there is a hierarchy of what is important and they are placed accordingly by the photographer or the designer. For example, when you look at a newspaper, the title of the newspaper and the headline are a lot bigger than the cell lines. This is because the graphic designers want your attention to be brought to what's most important and ultimately what will generate more sales. So you might make a more important element bigger and a less important element smaller and fainter. This applies to cinematography too. If you have a protagonist in the frame, you want them to be at the top of the hierarchy. Moving on to the rule of thirds. This is a composition technique in which an image/visual is divided evenly into thirds. It is a guideline for composition that suggests placing key graphic elements along vertical or horizontal lines, which therefore divide your image into thirds. According to this rule, the subject should be placed on the power lines/power points of the image. Power points are where the lines intersect, and these are usually where the most striking part of the image is placed, as its placement draws more attention to the audience. Positioning your image. When choosing to position your image, pay attention to your subject's eye line or the direction that they are facing. It is usually best if the subject is looking across the frame, as this makes for a more visually pleasing image. For example, if the subject is looking towards the left of the frame, place them on the right power line where possible, and vice versa. If the subject is looking towards your right, place them on the left power line. Another important factor here is how the subject's relationship with the background is created. The background is just as important as the foreground, so choosing how to position your image according to these factors is really important. This brings me on to balanced and unbalanced frames and the difference between the two. A balanced frame is when on either side of the image there is equal visual weight or information. Your attention isn't necessarily drawn to one side of the image. On the other hand, an unbalanced image is when there are unbalanced amounts of information or visual weight in either hemisphere of the image. To show this visually to you, we have a close-up image on screen where the subject is placed slightly towards the right with his right eye on the power line. On the left power line, we have what looks to be a gun. The image is balanced here as there is clear visual harmony. We don't feel unsettled with this image and we can clearly understand what is taking place. Also here, to go back to my earlier points, this is mostly a flat frame. There is obviously a sense of depth with the use of composition, however there is not a clear leading line that allows for relative size. Another example of a balanced frame is this one from Game of Thrones. Daenerys is placed towards the right and is looking across the frame. There are again equal amounts of visual weight across either side of the image and we're not distracted by either one. In comparison to the last image though, this frame is deep due to the leading line we can see in the background. This gives us a sense of depth. For example, if we put small lines across the wall and then compare them, we see that it gets smaller, meaning that we're able to interpret the depth and the distance of the image. Okay, so this is where I'm going to leave today's video. I hope that it gave you a little bit of basic information about visual composition. I will link a few resources in the description box if you want to go and learn a bit more about a specific part of this. I will also link my social medias and my podcast in the description box if you want to keep up with me. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and we will see you very soon.